is Rob Bertelli. Today we're going to run through a couple of the more basic welds commonly used in collision repair. We're going to do a butt weld, we're going to do a fillet joint, and then I'm going to attempt a butt with no backing. First of all, I'll give you a little history. I've been doing collision repair, training teams, basically having helpers for the last 45 years, mostly doing heavy collision. So let's get started. First of all, we want to set up the welder. This is a Miller 130 XP. It's the one I have at my house, so we'll use that. It's not normally used at a shop. They generally use a more powerful welder, but I've had a lot of success with this, and it works out real well. One of the first things you want to do is determine how thick of gauge metal you're going to be using to weld with. That helps to get the welder set up, the proper way. What I generally use is I have this mill gauge, or just a gauge that determines how thick the metal is, gives you an idea, and then you can use the chart, which I normally use first of all to get the base setting for the welder, and then I modify it from there. It's usually inside the cover with the wire. Goes along here. The metals that we'll be using today are, this is the thin coupons for ICAR. This is 18 gauge, so we'll be doing a lap joint or fillet joint with that. This is also thin, which we'll demonstrate a plug weld on. So this is also 22 gauge. I have a couple of the thick coupons here that I'm going to also do a plug weld on. These are 20 gauge. So that'd be a different setting on the welder because of the thickness of the steel. You're going to want to run it a little bit hotter. Not necessarily more welder, but I mean it really kind of comes down to weld style and preference as far as heat goes. My butt with no backer here is going to be the thin metal, which I will attempt. I haven't been practicing. I haven't welded with this welder in, gosh man, a couple of years. It's just been sitting in my shop. So without much practice, might be a good idea to see how it's all set up. Anyway, so based on the gauge of the chart that's in the welder, we are running 023 wire in this welder. So you're going to probably, with collision repair, you're going to have 023 or 030. There's some of the smaller gauge wires. It's very thin sheet metal on cars in a lot of places, so you don't want to have all that heat to melt the bigger wire. So this one, we also run a 7525 carbon dioxide and argon, which is best for MIG welding. So if we come down here, we go 7525. We're running 023 wire. We have 22 gauge. The welder recommends a 1 on the power setting here, and then a 30 on the wire speed. I'm not sure if it's because the welder's worn out or that kind of stuff happens in the real world, or it's just my welding style. But I prefer, and I will have it set for the thin gauge at a 2 power setting and a 70 wire speed. It could be because the liner on the welder is a little bit worn out, there's a little bit more resistance. I know the tension is set right, but other than that, I don't really, it's just kind of the way that it's always welded. You also want to check make sure you have gas, make sure the gas is turned on. I have my gas set at, you got to turn the welder on. I have it set at about 18 cubic feet per hour. It seems to be about right. My gauge reads cubic feet per hour, so that's kind of what I go off. Before you start welding, after you checked everything, you want to make sure the nozzle is clear. Make sure it's all nice and clean. I don't have it over here, but they make special tools to keep it clean. You don't want to tap it on the ground. You know, because it can damage the shield, it can make it out of shape, and it's really important that the shielding gas comes out consistently around the wire for an even weld and keeps the impurities out. You also want to make sure your contact tip is the right number. So like I said, this is 023 wire, so I want to make sure that my tip is 023. That way it makes correct contact coming out of the gun and you don't get intermittent welding. So those are some things to check. When you run out wire, I like to start with about 10 millimeters of run out. You want to make sure it's a clean cut at the end, usually when you start welding, because if you have that ball at the end, your welder has to generate a lot of heat to start that weld initially, and in the process, you know, it can create a situation on whatever you're welding on of a hot spot and a blow through, you know, all of those things. So once the welder's set up, it's turned on, gas is working. You want to have a pretty good helmet. This helmet is a auto darkening helmet. It's not the most expensive, but it's nice enough that it's got adjustments on the inside here for darkness, the delay, and then how quick it gets dark as well. So you can adjust all that stuff to fine tune depending on your situation of welding. I also have a cheater lens in here, and it's just taped in for right now, but it's a cheater lens. You know, it's like a magnifying glass, brings you closer to the weld, and it, you know, it just makes it better. It's also a good idea if you have access to a light, to put a light on the weld so that you can see everything very clearly when you're welding. I mean, you think the weld spark or the weld flash is bright enough, but that's not always the case. So, safety equipment, safety glasses, welding helmet. These are not necessarily welding gloves. I prefer these gloves. I've never really had an issue with them. I like to have the dexterity in my hands because doing collision repair, you're constantly tightening and loosening vice grips. You're taking things off. You're grabbing air hoses and air guns. And sometimes the welding gloves, here, let me show you these. They become very stiff and awkward to move in. I find that you lose your sense of touch, and you know, you can even be pulling the trigger when you're not necessarily ready. So I prefer a softer glove with more dexterity. But again, when you're doing that stuff, it's a matter of preference. You know, maybe I could learn to use a heavier glove, but I'm not comfortable with them. I probably used them in the beginning, but you know, these seem to be fine for me. Okay, so the welder setup, I did do 1 or 2 pre-welds. So I'm going to do a little bit of welding. So just be aware. I will signal, when I signal weld, that's when I start welding. If you were here and there were people around me, I would say that so that they have an idea of when I'm welding and they know not to look at the flash. So I'm going to weld, so just be aware. That one came out pretty good. You can see it's got pretty good penetration on the backside, and it's got a nice round bubble weld on the front. I'm not going to weld test it yet, but eventually when we're done with this, I'll destructive test it and you can see how it attached, and you know, we'll make sure that it tore out the way it's supposed to tear out. Cool. Again, I'm going to run a little bit of wire out. Cut it off about 10 millimeters. Good clean start. I'm going to try to stand in a different position. I don't recommend watching the weld, but you can get a better idea. Now, you're not always in the perfect position to weld some of these. You know, there's going to be some awkward positions. I mean, it's just not always going to be the way you want it. So you have to really kind of learn to do it without a lot of support or, you know, being in your favorite position. So, okay, we're going to try this. You probably noticed I was pulling the trigger on and off. I believe that would be called a stitch weld. The reason you do that, or that I do that, is so that you don't allow it to build up too much heat. If you allow it to build up too much heat, the potential for it burning through and creating a situation, a bad situation, I mean, it happens. It definitely happens. Fairly common. But you can see here, pretty decent stitch weld, right? The back side looks pretty consistent. It's got a nice burn through. I mean, I would call that first class. Kind of lucky, really. So I will try to do a destructive test on this as well when we're done. Okay, this one is a heavier metal. I think it was a 22 gauge or 20 gauge, one of them. Anyway, it was the other one. It's the thicker steel. I'm going to leave the welder set there just to see if it welds the same and has the same penetration. I think I'm going to leave it there. Yeah. So we'll see what happens. You know. Again, these are, you know, I'm welding here in this situation. It's the perfect situation. I have good access. I have good freedom in my arms. I'm always comfortable. And whenever you're welding, especially on a car, it is important to get as comfortable as you can. Make sure your arms are clear. Maybe practice holding the gun. Make sure you can pull the trigger, just so that you don't get any interference while you're trying to weld. You don't want to have your elbows bumping on things while you're trying to run a bead. And you want to make sure you can see it very clearly. You can't weld with your eyes shut, so you can't weld if you can't see it. Welding. I did not cut the wire off, and I saw that right away. I can tell by the ball at the end of the wire. Sounded like it welded really good, and it looked really good on the other side, but you'll see, and more than likely it might not pass the destructive test because there's not. So this is the weld side. This looks pretty good, right? Clean it up a little bit. I mean, I'd be happy with that if I saw that. However, there's not a lot of penetration on this side here. Ideally, I would want to see something here other than a heat mark. So when I do the destructive test, there's a real good chance that it's not going to pull a hole through here, which is not cool. Okay. So this is going to be my butt with no backing, straight butt. As you can see, maybe you can see there's a gap in there. You want the gap to be at a minimum the thickness of the steel that you're going to weld. I mean, I do believe maybe they recommend twice that thickness. I don't recall, but I'm going to do, this is about the gap is big enough for a piece of this metal to fit through there. So let's see what happens. When you're repairing the car, it's really important to note that, yes, these are some of the suggested methods of welding new panels onto old panels, but it's very important to go look in all data, look under your vehicle specific make and model, and find out exactly what they recommend. They're going to tell you whether they want a butt, a straight butt with backing, lap joint or fillet joint, but it's important to do it in the proper locations and do the proper weld to fasten the parts onto the vehicle. Otherwise, you could create a situation, an unsafe situation, where possibly somebody could get hurt, and it would ultimately be your fault as the person that repaired the car. I'm already having issues with this. I'm going to try to get another tack on it, because what's happening is the metal's getting warm and it's pulling away from each other, creating a bigger gap in there. Not being successful. Appears too hot. I'm going to bump the wire speed up a little bit. I'm not sure if that's the right thing to do, but I mean, if this was on a vehicle, I have to figure out some way to get it to weld. Okay, that was horrible. It was not good. I don't have any idea what it looks like on the other side. It was rough. That was rough. Sometimes when you're in the middle of fixing the car, whew, yeah, that's rough. When you don't know what it looks like on the other side, I'm going to see where I have the wire brush so you can see just how ugly this is. Man, I got one with my new toolkit. I don't know where it went. Alright, well I don't have a wire brush, but I'm going to show you anyway. This is the front where I was having trouble and I kept blowing through. I think ultimately I was holding the welder too close to the metal and it was getting too hot and I just kept blowing through. So on the back side, I mean, I have no doubt this weld is going to hold. It's not going to fall apart, that's for sure. But cosmetically, I mean, it's pretty rough. You can also see here, if you look, that as soon as I started, because of the heat, it warped it and it pushed it away because I had them clamped up right next to each other. I will destructive test it because more than likely it's going to hold, but I mean the weld itself is not going to break in half. It's just atrocious. Okay, so that was all the welding I was going to do. Just some basic joints. I'm not telling you these are the only way to do it. These are just some examples that I know to fix a car. And again, you should always look at the repair procedures and all that. So this is a plug weld that I did. I'm going to destructive test it, and this was the thin metal to thick metal plug weld. And this is the one that I said probably didn't have proper penetration. So I'm going to clamp it in. Well, I'll tell you, it's good enough to not hold in the vise, so that's a good sign, I guess. We need a bigger hammer. Just stick this under there and help it. Just as I thought. It was stronger than I thought it would be. Maybe just because of the size of the weld. If you look close, you can see that it did penetrate about halfway into the thick piece of metal, but the weld literally just tore out. So, I mean, it needed to be hotter. Maybe I needed a bigger hole, but it didn't do what I thought it was going to do. So, I mean, it failed. I would say this is a fail as far as the plug weld goes. This is the thin, which this had good penetration through it. I mean, I have no doubt this was going to hold. I actually welded it wrong, so I'm not sure how I'm going to get this split apart. I'll get it. Appreciate you watching this whole video if you're actually watching it. Gotta be pretty good. This one is holding on for dear life. It really is. That's crazy. Okay, so perfect results on this one. So this was the weld. This was the plug. This is actually the side that I welded it on. This is the back side of the weld. This is where it tore out. So you can see where it tore out. I mean, it was almost the same size as the weld. It was a little bit smaller, which is what you want. So, I mean, that's a success in my mind. I wish that the thin to heavy did the same thing, but that's what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to tear a plug out like that. This is my fillet joint. Again, that's a beautiful weld. Looks like it's thin. So we're going to destroy this as well. Maybe? Yeah. Not sure if I would call this a win or not. Definitely got some penetration into the metal. You can see the notch where the weld was. I mean, it didn't break the weld, that's for sure. Beautiful weld, I gotta say so. Good penetration on the back. So, I mean, I'm gonna call it a success. I would give that a pass, I guess, because the weld itself didn't break. Now my horrible straight butt level. I mean, I know this is gonna hold, it's just very ugly. So, I mean, it held. It's just ugly. You know, but to be honest, you can't ever see the backside anyway. You're gonna want to spray it with some cavity wax, something to prevent this backside weld from rusting. But ideally, it would have been nicer if it looked better on the backside. But again, we don't know. I mean, I just like to not have a bunch of wire pieces sticking in through there and all that stuff. So, anyway, that's it. That's all I got. Enjoy.